Hello, BookTube. I want to do a quick preparatory video here for the inaugural Steve Tiberius Donoghue book club, which is going on now in February. We're reading this. We're reading Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman, her 1970s history of the 14th century with all of the amazing continent-shaking stuff that was going on at the time and all the people who were making it go on. This was a big hit when it first came out, and I wanted to start with it for the STD Donoghue, the STD book club. But I did wonder if it was a wise choice. I thought about that quite a bit. I thought, I love the book, but it's a big work of history. It was popular history. It was meant for a wide audience, but still, I know a lot of even avid readers tend to shy away from big works of history or big works of biography because they think this is going to be dull. This is going to bore me, or it's going to be beyond my pay grade or whatever. And yet, I was bombarded right from the beginning with emails from people saying, I've got a copy, or I've put a copy on hold in my library. Every library will have a copy of this book, or I got an ebook or something like that. I've been sent lots and lots of pictures of people who sent me pictures of their copy of A Distant Mirror. And that cheered me up quite a bit. But not as much as all of the people who have been sending me emails saying that they didn't need to do any of those things because they've actually had a copy of this book sitting on their shelves or on their parents' shelves forever. And they've looked at it forever, and they've never really given any serious thought to pulling it down and reading it, and now they have, and they're liking what they're encountering. That's wonderful to hear. That really is. Because, after all, I don't believe in the concept of an improving book. Once upon a time in your grandparents' generation, that was a standard thing that people talked about. Go, lay down and take up an improving book. I don't believe in any such thing. Books are meant to be enjoyed. If a book is written in such a way that it can't be enjoyed, in other words, like a lot of history, if it's written dry as dust and very boring, very wordy, very pompous, very bloated, then it's a bad book. I don't care what its research is like. I don't care how many languages its bibliography is in. It's a bad book if it doesn't entertain you. There's nothing wrong with saying that. That is not a reductive or a juvenile way to look at reading. And I'm perfectly willing to admit, I love history and biography, but I'm perfectly willing to admit that those two genres, especially history, their authors are institutionally encouraged to forget that their main job is to tell a story, even though the word story is right there in the word history. So I didn't put this thing as our inaugural Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club choice in order to put a little fiber in your diet. I didn't do that for any reason. I did it because it is enjoyable, because you will really enjoy it. And I've been very gratified to hear. I don't think I've heard a negative vote yet. I think most of the people who've emailed me have said, I am reading this, I'm enjoying it, and that fact is surprising me. And so that's encouraging. I admit I still don't know what I'm doing when it comes to this book club. I plan on doing the Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club every month, forever. So I'd better learn what I'm doing when it comes to how we're going to do this book club. I still haven't figured that out. One thing I am confident in is that I can rule out Discord. It seems ideally built for this sort of thing, but until I announced this book club, I had largely stayed ignorant of Discord. And then I announced it, and a lot of people were suggesting, you should think about doing Discord for an ongoing book club discussion forum. And then a whole bunch of I noticed that Discord is linked to a whole bunch of other BookTube channels. Even Michael K. Vaughan started a book club at the same time that I did, and he set up a Discord directly dedicated to his book club. Got a lot of people joining it right away. And I went and silently lurked in a lot of those Discords, and I have to say, I did not like what I saw. It seemed like ungoverned chaos that, if it were to remain pleasant and courteous and governed, would be something I would have to do. It has my name on it. People are getting an invite from me to go there. I would have to run herd on this thing, and I am not interested in doing that at all. I have enough things to run herd on. It seemed like an extremely annoying extravagance to add on, so it definitely won't be Discord, which left me with only a few alternatives. It seems to me that a dedicated Voxer group to A Distant Mirror would be very little different than a Discord. It I think would quickly devolve into chaos. And it would also be something that that would be going 24 hours a day that I would have to stay involved in. I would have to stay abreast of it because it's my event. You know, if I'm one host out of 20 for a BookTube event and it has a Voxer group, I can dip in now and then and see what people are saying, but I don't have to pay attention to it all the time. If it's my book club, I would have to do that. But if I leave out Discord and Voxer, it seems to me that the only other alternative is just maybe a live stream now and again, although our live streams go off course, or discussions in videos. And you're always, of course, free to email me. Maybe that. I'm figuring that this is one of those things. When we were starting CPL Radio's Book of the Day, my producer said, these things have a way of working themselves out. You really don't have to worry about pre-planning every little detail. The details will hammer themselves out over time. And I think that's probably right. I think that's probably going to happen here. So I don't know yet what I'm going to do. The month is still very young, so I don't need to. But I've got the book, and I wanted to read you a couple of passages from the beginning just to calm any remaining fears or worries that you might have that this is the book for you. I didn't go into this with any kind of an improving attitude. I did not go into this in any way to reshape your expectations or show you the light or anything like that. But if I can add a genre to your reading that you have intentionally ruled out, that would be great. I would love to do that. I wanted to read you a couple of things here before I wrap this up. This is just a quick preliminary video. I'll make a couple more of these, and then we'll dig into the first part of the book. But I wanted to mention, in her foreword to this book, Barbara Tuchman writes about some aspects of history. I want to read it, one passage, a couple of passages there about that. One must remember that the Middle Ages change color depending on who is looking at them. Historians' prejudices and points of view, and thus their selection of material, have changed considerably over the past 600 years. During the 3 centuries following the 14th, history was virtually a genealogy of nobility, devoted to tracing dynastic lines and family connections, and infused by the idea of noble as a superior person. These works of enormous antiquarian research teem with information of more specific dynastic interests, such as Anselm's idea about the Gascon lord who bequeathed 100 livres to the dowries of poor girls he had deflowered. See, even here, she can't resist giving a piquant, specific incident. She does that perfectly, all throughout the book. She'll make a discussion, she'll give a historian summary, but it always comes down to an incredible line, an incredible anecdote. The French Revolution marks the great reversal, following which historians saw the common man as hero, the poor as ipso facto virtuous, nobles and kings as monsters of iniquity. Simeon Luce, in his History of the Jacquerie, is one of these, slanted in his text, yet unique in his research, and invaluable in his documents. The giants of the 19th and early 20th century, who unearthed and published the sources, annotated and edited the chronicles, collected the literary works, read and excerpted masses of sermons, treaties, letters, and other primary material, provided the ground on which we latecomers walk. She doesn't mention that all of those were Germans, but they were. We owe them an incalculable debt for scraping away the crap and the crud that had grown up around the actual discipline of history and returning it to its roots, which is amass as many sources as you can, analyze them with your common sense and your experience, and then write them up in a very entertaining way. But I want to mention one other point that she makes here, because you're going to notice it the more you read this book. Distant Mirror is a parade of iniquities. It's a parade of tragedies. It's a time of revolt and unceasing war that was conducted mostly against ordinary people, ordinary farmsteaders and whatnot. I know when you think about, for instance, in this case, the 100 Years' War, you think about knights in armor. But that was one person out of 10,000. Most of the people weren't combatants. They didn't want war to come to their little valley, and they were completely ruined. Their crops were destroyed, their livestock was requisitioned, their daughters were raped, their men were spiked or drafted. And then there was the plague. there were 2 forms. Barbara Tuchman says there were 2 forms of plague that struck: the bubonic plague and a pneumonic version of the bubonic plague that was much more virulent, much faster acting. You put all those things together and you get what she herself calls the calamitous 14th century, but she has a word of warning about that in her foreword. She writes, "A great hazard, built into the very nature of recorded history, is the overload of the negative. The disproportionate survival of the bad side of evil, misery, contention, and harm. In history, this is exactly the same as in the daily newspaper. The normal does not make the news. History is made by the documents that survive, and these lean heavily on crisis and calamity, crime and misbehavior, because such things are the subject matter of the documentary process, of lawsuits, treaties, moralist denunciations, literary satire, papal bulls. No pope ever issued a bull to approve of something. Negative overload can seem to be at work in the religious reformer Nicholas, who, in denouncing an unfit and unworldly prelates in 1401, said that in his anxiety for reform, he would not discuss the good clerics because, quote, they do not count beside the perverse man. So once again, I want to point out a technique of this author, which she employs all throughout this book. Even when she's discussing theoreticals, she is discussing a theoretical there, the human psychological propensity for accentuating the negative. But even there, she can't resist a closing quip, a closing anecdote. That is a joy of this book. It never fails. But it's true. What she's saying in both those cases is true, which is that history is going to be, to some extent, influenced by the predisposition of the historian. Which is, believe it or not, I know that some of you are new to reading history. That's going to seem maddening. How do I know who to trust if that's true? But believe it or not, it adds to the fun. And that bit about overloading the negative, that is absolutely true. She's actually guilty of it in this book. I don't think she's aware of that. I don't see any awareness in the foreword or in any of her notes that she's aware that she is doing the very thing she warned people about in her own foreword to her own book. But with the 14th century, it's hard to avoid. What she's trying to say in that note, I think, is don't forget that there were plenty of people who were just trying to go about their days. Now, that was almost impossible to do in France during the period that we'll be reading about, but in England it was certainly possible to do. People went about their business. Widows ran their taverns. People laughed and told jokes. There were normal days. Even in the heart of the contended areas in the Aquitaine in France, there were still normal days. You won't be reading about many of them in this book, but it's important to remember that they're there not only because that's a more balanced view of the 14th century, but because the reverse also works, right? It's important to remember that as dark as the news looks in the 23rd century, and the 21st century, there are still plenty of happy days, plenty of upsides for most people. That becomes extra pointed as we get into this book because Barbara Tuchman writes about this. She writes in the prefatory material to this book that it was inspired by the calamitous late 60s and early 70s. It was inspired by the time she was living through, which she viewed as similar to the 14th century. How parochial that must seem to us now. Our own time seems far more of an analogy to the 14th century than hers did. And I guarantee you that in 60 years, when I do another read-along of this book, we will be thinking the same thing. How naive we were in 2023 to think things were that bad. You have to keep that in mind. I think that helps just mentally to keep that in mind. But we are going to go on with the Steve Donoghue Book Club. So this book is split into two parts. We're reading the first half of the first part for this first week. And I guess I will do a dedicated video about it this weekend, whether or not I do a live stream or anything like that. I'm still feeling my way. This first book is kind of a guinea pig, a test period. I know already what we're reading next month, and I bet it'll be easier. Certainly I will know more about it. It won't seem quite so new. But anyway, it's just a quick preparatory video. I would say ordinarily here that I would love to hear in the comments section about how many of you are joining in, but I know that a lot of you are. A lot of you are skipping the comments section and just emailing me. And quite a few of you are also indulging in what has become an informal ritual with my email. All the internet friends of mine that I had when I started this channel said, don't give out your email. Are you insane? Don't do that. They were all wrong. They were all dead wrong. I imagine if my channel had 1 million subscribers, I might think that, but there's an informal tradition that has cropped up when it comes to emailing me about anything. Not just the Steve Tiberius Donoghue Book Club, but anything. And that tradition is, whether you're asking me a piece of advice, or you're telling me about your day, or in this instance, you're sending me a picture of the copy of The Distant Mirror that you'll be reading and telling me that you're joining in, there's always an accompanying picture of a pet. Usually it's a dog. Sometimes it's a cat. Sometimes it's not even a quadruped. It's absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. But ordinarily, at this point, I would say in the comment section, let me know if you're joining in. and is this your first time reading A Distant Mirror, and all the usual calls to action crap. Except now I know the answer to that. I know that a lot of you are doing this, or reading this book for February. That's great. All I need to do is get my act together and figure out how to do a book club, which I maybe should have figured out before I started one. We'll figure it out together. So anyway, I'll wrap this up, and we will talk about this book this weekend somehow, some way. So I'll see you then. Thank you, BookTube.